everyone, it's Stacey. Today's video is going to be a little bit different because we're wrapping up our log cabin block swap. I'm going to be going over what a block swap even is, and then I'm going to show you all what we did. So the idea of a block swap is just to have fun with quilting. You generally start with what design you're going to do, and then you have a few rules. You might decide what colors to use, what colors not to use, how many to make, and what date you're going to send them in by, and whatever other rules that your group decide on. Then you make your blocks, you send them into someone who's the coordinator, they shuffle them all around, and then they'll send you back a completely different set. And then from that set, you'll make the ultimate scrappy quilt. And now I'd like to show you what my group made. We did a log cabin block, and I'd like to show you the process and the beautiful quilt that I made from all the blocks that I received. So the first thing I did was open up all the packages. So this part was really fun. It was so exciting finally getting to see all the different blocks that we'd received as part of our block swap. Then I made little booklets documenting everybody's blocks that were sent in, and of course I decided to secure them by using my sewing machine, which is another one of my favorite hacks that you can do with a sewing machine. Then I laid out all my blocks so I could easily group them. I worked out who was going to get which blocks back. Now this was a little bit trickier than expected, but we got there in the end. So once I worked out who was getting which blocks back, I made them up a little pack with the blocks they were getting. The book that I made, and I showed you how I made this, what I did was I photographed every single person's block and just noted their name and where they were from. I just thought that was an extra nice keepsake so people could see that the blocks that they'd received, who they were from and where they were from, which is something that I know I'll keep forever. And then for some people they also wanted a label, and the label is woven and that's designed to actually sew onto their quilt when they've finished making it. So that was a really nice little extra touch. So when you receive your blocks back, now we're going to make our quilt top. But first what we need to do is check the size of them. Now some people really did struggle getting the blocks to measure 12.5 inches square. So I said don't worry about it, just send them in and we'll work it out. Now the best thing to do is to cut them all down to the smallest size. However, most of mine did measure 12.5 inches square. Some of them were off by 1/4 of an inch. So what I decided to do was cut them all down by 1/4 of an inch. I had one that was actually short by 1/2 an inch. So what I did was I actually cut off the final strip and I actually made a new strip and sewed that on. So I did get my 12.25 inch square. And that's what I recommend you do. I think you'll find you've only got one or two that are much smaller than the 12.25 inch. So let's cut them all down to 12.25 inch, and any that are smaller than that, I think the best thing to do is to add on a little bit extra or cut off that whole row and add it on. The other option would have been to add a border around every single one and then make that border a little bit bigger, so that you're allowing for the ones that are too big and too small, and then you'd cut them down all to the right size with the borders on. But that was an awful lot of work and I thought it was a little bit tricky, so I decided it was best just to cut them down to the smaller size, bearing in mind that there was just that one that was really small. So instead of cutting them all down to that extra small size, I decided to fix that one block instead of cutting them all down to the smaller size. Now one more thing to remember is when you are trimming them off, what I did do was when I cut my little 1/4 of an inch off, I didn't just cut it from one side because I thought they would look too obvious. So I did cut it off a little bit on either side, well actually all 4 sides. So once you've cut all your blocks down to the same size, now it's time to sew your quilt top together. And we're just going to use exactly the same process that we did for your first quilt. And of course you can refer back to all my videos for that. So you need to arrange your blocks, how you'd like to sew them together. You might want to do that on a bed or on the table or on the floor or wherever's best for you. then you'll sew your blocks together, creating your columns, and then you sew your columns together, creating your quilt top. Then you follow the usual process to making a quilt. The one thing to remember is where you'd like to sew your label. I'm actually thinking I'd like to sew mine onto the front of my quilt, but it really is a personal preference and wherever you decide to sew it. But I can't wait to see what you decide to do. So now I've finished my quilt top. I absolutely adore it. I think it's so beautiful and I love how scrappy it is. There's no way in a million years that I would have been able to put together this quilt with all these different fabrics, because first of all, it's everybody else's different taste. And you all pick different fabrics and you're all drawn to different colorways and different fabrics that work together. So that's the beauty of it, is you really end up with quite a unique quilt. So I absolutely adore mine. I'm so thankful and grateful that some of you chose to join me on this little adventure. I hope you enjoyed it as much as me, and thank you for joining me. Next week we're going to be moving on to our month of small Christmas projects for September. Thank you for watching my videos. If you're enjoying them, please like, subscribe and leave a comment.